Basically, my dad was so there's this coalition government. When the leader of that government, so Sir James Muncombe, left Seychelles to come over to England for the Queen's Silver Jubilee, I think, his coalition government took over the country by coup d'etat. Now, a coup d'etat is a military takeover. So they literally, the military in that country, or the army, or whatever group, okay, a military group, take over the country by force. So they go into the government buildings, take it over. They go and on the streets they enforce the law, and they become the government. Okay, so they take over the police, they take over the army, they take over all those things that would belong to a government, and they take over called a coup d'etat. And that happened, I think, in 1977, but you'd have to ask my dad. My dad was a young student at the time. He was born in 1960, so he was only 17. I was born in 1979, so when my dad became a father very early on, before his 19th birthday. So you can imagine, it's all kind of, lots of things happened at the same time at a very early age. So anyway, this new government, the socialist government, and they were called the SPPF, headed by a man called Albert Renier, he took over the country by force while this guy was away. And his philosophy was, let's give our country back to the poor people, which I think he used to manipulate the people within that country, but hey, who knows. My dad was a student. My family were not wealthy, but they were Democrats. So they believed in a kind of democratic system, and a system where there was, it was very friendly to the outside world, and things like that. I'm not sure. Are you following?
Yeah.
Yeah, great. And so his family, like my dad's family, just started losing everything. So my dad was fired from his customs job. So if you're working at customs, it means at the airport you're overseeing what's coming into the country and what's leaving the country, I think. So it's a little bit like checking goods as they move in and out of the country. So he was fired from that job. And then he couldn't get a job anywhere because my family had previously supported the democratic government. Okay, and now, instead of being a coalition government, there was just one point of view allowed in the country. Okay, so that you weren't allowed to be democratic anymore. So then my dad was involved in sports back home. So all the sports clubs were made illegal if it wasn't associated with the government. So if you had a volleyball sports club that you just set up, that was now illegal. There was a 10:30 curfew on the country, so every single person had to be in their house by 10:30. And I think in the early stages that was even less. So I think that was a much earlier evening. So can you imagine in this country if your parents couldn't go out after a certain time?
It's awful.
Yeah, it's something that you probably would, and I would. I'm British now. I would find it awful. But anyway, blah blah blah. Yeah, he was very rebellious. He was very kind of, I'm not having any of this. Big mouth, strikes, still went ahead anyway, complaining about the government, having these kind of underground little meetings, anti-government meetings, and all this kind of thing. And outsiders tried to come and take the country back in the late 70s from this party, and they failed, and they were all arrested, and my dad was arrested. So my dad's arrested then, and then I remember when I was about 3, my dad being arrested again. And I remember going to visit my dad in prison, not because he was, a terrorist or anything, but just simply because he believed in democracy and he wouldn't shut up about it. My granddad lost his job, and he was a kind of a contractor. So he, for instance, supervised the building of the National Stadium, which in comparison to Wembley is a tiny achievement. But for that country, where there was only at the time about 70,000 people, maybe even less, it was a big achievement. He was fired from that job. My gran couldn't work. My great-grandmother, who's still alive, couldn't work, on my dad's side of the family. But on my mum's side of the family, because they were government supporters, because they were socialists, they were okay. So it was really kind of, a big thing for my parents, because one had property and had not a lot of wealth, but a level of wealth, and it had all been taken. And then another side of the family had no wealth, but they were now being given opportunities to get wealth from people who, it was kind of as if the government was saying, well, you're poor not because of a lack of education, but because these people have taken it from you. So it's very kind of playing people off against each other, by my understanding of how my family has spoken about it. So for me, when I was younger, I didn't live with my mum, because my mum lived with her family. I lived with my dad's family, but from the age of 3, my dad had run away from the country because he was going to be killed. He was on a kind of death list. So he had to run away in the middle of the night. Oh my God, I'm going to start crying. But he had to run away in the middle of the night and escape his country. The only reason he found out that my family was they had their kind of suspicions. They had their suspicions about what kind of danger they were in. But one day my dad had been let out of prison, and the story goes that one day this Rastafarian turns up at my grand's house and says to my gran in the middle of the night, your son has to get out now. My gran's very proud and was not very snobby, but I think being in this country, she's definitely not, except for she's got high standards. But back there, she probably may have come across as a bit of a snob, but very kind. But she was just like, who are you and what are you doing on my property? And he was just like, you've got to leave, because if you don't leave, if your son doesn't leave, then he's not going to last he's not going to last. He's on this blacklist, this government blacklist that I know about. So they believed this guy, and I and my family are 100% convinced that it's the truth. And through time, my parents have become convinced that it was absolute honesty that we heard from this guy who'd obviously seen this list. So my dad had to escape in the middle of the night by boat, I think, to, as story goes, so he'd have to be here to give you the details, go into Mauritius, stay there with a family that we knew for 3 months, then come by himself to England to stay with another family called the Hoopers, who had been turfed out of the country a few months earlier. So I came here in 1985 because my parents wanted to be reunited, obviously, and so my mum brought me over to England and to Hounslow, where there was already a kind of small Creole community in 1985. So that's when I started my life as a British person, really.
Thank you, Ms. Volcere, for having us. And
thank you. Thanks, Laura.